Welcome back to Sommbox, another exciting one today. My God, topic that everybody should love. Gevrey Chambertin, the king, Napoleon's favorite, and hopefully now yours. With this exceptional box, you get not only one, but 6 chances to see how incredible this magical terroir is, and if indeed it can live up to its very kingly reputation. So thanks to Kate and Con for working with me on this one to bring to you one of the coolest producers in Burgundy, not only because he's a fellow Canadian, although, you know, the whole Frenchy Canadian thing, it's different than us Torontonians. But Pascal Marchand, I also have a very personal history with this because the first time I went to Burgundy, he was always a good friend of Nicolas Potel's. So, of course, I have an ongoing history with Pascal at so many events and chance meetings and tastings. The first time I ever set foot in Domaine Comte-Armand. Back then, Benjamin Leroux had just taken over for Pascal Marchand, which is where he made a serious splash in 1985 as perhaps the first French-Canadian import to be head winemaker of such a storied, renowned winery like Comte-Armand. But at the age of 22, Pascal took over and revolutionized this already reputed winery. He started converting things to organic and even biodynamic back when that was not a trend. It was not a thing. And I'll never forget the first time I realized that Burgundy could be a doppelganger almost for Barolo. I mean, what in the heck? Although Benjamin was already at the reins since a couple of years, I was able to try some of the last vintages of Pascal's before he had left. And it was unreal. I had no idea that Burgundy could be like this. Now, before you think, oh boy, is this going to be like one-way ticket to Tannentown with this box? Hold your horses. This is just setting the table. Give me a minute. So years later, after going on to Domaine de la Vougerie and starting that project, and then departing and starting out his global consultation phase, also making fantastic wine in Australia, Pascal came back to Burgundy, sparked up an amazing cooperation with an old-time friend and business partner, Tawse, and thus Marchand-Tawse was born. And what began as sort of a negociant, they began acquiring fantastic vineyards, mostly in Gevrey Chambertin, as they purchased the old school historical estate of Domaine Môme, based in Gevrey Chambertin, with, of course, fantastic holdings in Liudis, Premier Crus, and Grand Crus. And this basically established them as a powerhouse at the northern end of the Côte. And having firsthand observed the whole evolution of Pascal Marchand, from his Pommard days up to the other side of the Côte in Gevrey Chambertin, as you'll see, as you start popping these wines one after the other, his style has shifted from brute force to absolute elegance. He values more low intervention, a little less harsh extraction, and even plays around with a lot of whole grape, whole cluster fermentation, wherever, of course, it is applicable, weather and vintage and vineyard, of course, allowing. So we kick it off with the Village Gevrey. I mean, just such a joy to drink. It's so filigreed and fine and regal. I mean, you get a little bit of an idea of why Gevrey is so beloved when you see this basically like everyday, well, not everyday drinker, but luxury everyday drinker in just its most pretty and accessible form without losing any intellectualism. I mean, absolutely stunning. Moving on now to some exciting Liudi kind of stuff and Premier Crus, oh boy, the Etellois. Oh, Etellois. Now, again, in every situation with Burgundy, of course, you can throw money around and just drink the Grand Crus, but it's always the treasure hunting collector's sort of passion to find those little vineyards, those Liudis, or parts of Premier Crus, which can almost give you the same character as, let's say, a much more reputed vineyard, which they happen to share a border with. And this one just happens to be right below one of my personal favorite vineyards in Gevrey, Grand Cru vineyards, Gevrey Chambertin. And I think the name says it all. The Gevrey in French is this little, very dark, very juicy cherry. And that's always the character of this wine. And this is exactly that, just in a more accessible version. Dark, rich, spicy, seductive, just absolutely beautiful wine, which gives you that plushness and that roundness, which you find from that smack dab in the middle of Gevrey Grand Cru territory kind of character. Then we move on to 2 fantastic Premier Crus. Now, in line with Pascal's style and his sort of, evolution of mentality, these are 2 Premier Crus which don't show you that flash and that fat and that sexiness. In fact, they're both high elevation, cool, rocky, and lean. These are wines that you want to stuff away and age for a little while because the returns you get on them are absolutely stunning. And both of these have that absolute Gevrey character of like a snarling animal on a leash, just kind of like with its fur on its neck bristling and kind of lightly snarling at you. It's like waiting to pounce. But it also shows you the other side of the Gevrey game. This intensely regal, stately, structured, like a skyscraper structure kind of thing going on here, which is the epitome for me greatness. When you can be an aristocrat with a beast mode, that's it, man. Everything else kind of pales in comparison. Of course, the Lavaux Saint-Jacques. So both these premier crus are basically in combes. So as the geology formed, these alluvial fans, when the ocean broke through this sort of line of mountains or hills, it would create kind of like a fan out into the lower lands. And up above, you have this clustering of crazy stony soils, higher in elevation, about 350, 360 meters in elevation, which by Burgundian standards is pretty high. Maybe not Argentine, but yeah, in Burgundy. So, okay. And these vineyards, of course, get the wind whipping down from over the coast, down through these valleys. And so they're windy, they're breezy, they're cool, wind-swept, poor soils, and of course produce much more wines of nerve and tension. The Champeaux being basically around like the Castier and the Combe-en-Moine, in case you are a Gevrey connoisseur and of course know those names. And there are a couple of fantastic owners of Champeaux. I really love this vineyard. I love drinking Domaine de Varoise and I love drinking Alain Bourgues. Of course, Denis Mortet. But I mean, this is really in a class of producers who make absolutely brilliant wine with these things, but of course they need a little time. And then the Lavaux Saint-Jacques doesn't need a huge introduction, right? It's right in that sort of triumvirate of glory of the Éternel Saint-Jacques, Lavaux Saint-Jacques, and the Clos Saint-Jacques, of course, one of the most famous and most revered of all of the Gevrey crus. And in some cellars, Clos Saint-Jacques certainly is better than some of the lower level Grand crus from the same producer. So this is some Salamin territory. But the good news is, unlike the Clos Saint-Jacques, which is already ultra hyped and of course well known, Lavaux Saint-Jacques is one of those three that can sometimes slip a little under the radar. And so it ends up being brilliant quality, but a much better value than perhaps the bigger named crus. Which brings us now to the two Grand Crus. Two, count them, two Grand Crus. And what's really cool is that these are probably two of my favorites for very different reasons. It seems like almost every village in Burgundy has some sort of charm, right? If it's Chambeau or if it's Meursault. Well, Gevrey, of course, does as well, but Gevrey's charm is Grand Cru. Now, charm runs directly up from the Moray Saint-Denis border. So they tend to be more charming, more lush, more forward. From the bottom parts of the vineyard, it's a similar situation to actually the charm in Meursault. You have a lower part, which goes right down to the main road, the RN74, and you have an upper part, which just like the Meursault charm, is stonier, higher, lean, better drained, and produce much more sort of lively and intense versions of charm. So again, it's worth looking into who's producing it to know where it's coming from, to know if it's an easier drinking Grand Cru or if it's something you might want to collect or hold on to. And the funny thing about charm is it's actually got two parts. You might see in some old books Mazoyer or Charme Chambertin, because while you cannot call a charm a Mazoyer, you can call a Mazoyer a charm. You're like, why would you do that? Mazoyer is usually better. Correct. However, historically speaking, no one really knew what Mazoyer was about. So a lot of producers would just call it charm, even though it was Mazoyer, because they could sell it better. Well, of course, Pascal, being a stickler for terroir and a true terroirist, there is no way in hell he would call his Mazoyer a charm. And so Mazoyer is the continuation of charm on the northern part, and by most accounts, it's the more intense, deep, rich, spicy sort of style of charm. Similar language, but certainly different dialect, and in my opinion, a superior charm. Then we go to the Mazie. Now, it gets a little bit tricky with all the Gevrey Chambertin Grand Crus, because at some point, they all kind of mash into one in your head, right? Clos de Bèze, Chambertin, Mazie, Mazoyer, Latricière, Rouchotte, Griot. Oh my gosh. I know it's a lot to keep track of. But understand that if Clos de Bèze is the king, Chambertin is the queen, Mazie is certainly the regent to the king. It certainly belongs in the same court. All the stateliness, all the depth, all the ageability, the insane complexity and intellectual natures of it. But I think of all of the crus, Mazie might have the most seamless, beautiful, and fascinating integration of the animal and the stately side of Chambertin all in one, with a depth that is almost unparalleled. And as you will see in this glass, the finish goes for days. Oh my God. Whenever you see a Mazie, you have to take the chance to drink it. it. It's just a singular experience. And without footing the bill for a Clos de Bez or a Chambertin itself, this is a wine that will truly show you why Gevrey Chambertin is so majestic. I can talk about Burgundy, especially Gevrey Chambertin, for days, but I hope that this was a great overview for you onto one of the world's truly greatest terroirs of Gevrey Chambertin. And we'll be back next time with another incredible box. We'll see you on Sommbox.